Forza Motorsport has introduced a pretty controversial game mechanic regarding upgrading and progression. You now have to spend a lot more time with a particular car if you want to buy certain upgrades and improve your overall performance. However, tuning remains at the core of progression and optimization within Forza. In this video, I'm going to run through all of the tuning options, along with how to unlock each tuning option, as many of them are locked away at the start, and I'll then show you what each tuning option does, how it affects your car, and finally I'll touch on specific ways to tune your car to achieve certain results and make your car handle better. Before jumping into the nitty gritty about each tuning option and what it does, I first want to look over some key areas of tuning in Forza Motorsport. First, you've got to kind of understand how to change your car setup in Forza, and you have this upgrade and tuning menu. In here you have a range of settings where you can adjust how your car is tuned and upgraded. The performance sub-menu will allow you to upgrade your car using car points, and this is where you buy new car parts such as exhaust, engine parts, suspension, etc. Then to actually create a custom tune or setup, you'll need to head over to the tuning setup sub-menu. Here you'll be able to scroll through all of the individual tuning options that are available. Once you've created a custom tune for your car, you can use the setup manager to save your setup, and this lets you create custom tunes where you can load them or share them with the community. Upgrading your car parts does sit aside from the overall tuning, but it's very much linked. New car upgrades will unlock new areas of the tuning menu. Many of the individual tuning options require specific upgrades to be installed. For example, you'll require a race suspension to be able to adjust much of your suspension tuning setup. And this is fairly realistic, as most stock car parts in real life don't allow for any adjustments to be made. It's only when you start installing track-ready upgrades that you start to get parts with adjustments. Within every area of the tuning menu, you'll see on the right-hand side a little bit of information about that specific setting or what it does, but at the very top of this, there's a sentence which highlights any restrictions. You'll see that with the gearing, for example, it says I need a gearbox with a sport or race suspension to be able to make adjustments. I'll then need to jump into the car upgrade menu, buy the correct transmission, and then head back to the tuning menu to be able to make those adjustments. Within the setup manager, you can download community setups, and these are great for quickly maxing out your car's performance or if you're not really into tuning that much. But they can be incredibly hit and miss. The majority of community setups in Forza tend to be maxed out cars, and they're very rarely what you're after. Creating a tune is all about creating a car that handles well and is adapted to your own personal driving style. With a community tune, it's hard to find that perfect tune that's right in the sweet spot of what you're looking for. I'd always recommend learning some tips on how to tune cars yourself, which hopefully this video will do. This allows you to take any tune, either one you found online or via the community tune menu, and you can adapt it to your own requirements. So now we've looked at a few key areas of the overall tuning in Forza and how it works, I want to now run through each part of tuning and show you what every car setup item does and how to tune it. I'm going to start with the tyres, as this is the first option in the car setup menu. Other than the various tyre upgrades such as width and compound, we get the options to change our tyre pressures. This can be done independently on the front and rear tyres. Increasing the pressures inflates them, which reduces the amount of tyre that's in contact with the track, and this is useful for making your car more responsive, especially if you increase the front tyre pressures. If you lower them though, the larger the contact patch is with the road. This will dampen the steering a little bit, making your car a little slower to turn in, but it can increase your overall traction. Essentially, lowering your rear tyre pressures can help a little bit with oversteer. It's important to say that if you do increase your tyre pressures, you'll gain tyre temperature faster, and this can in some cases cause your tyres to wear at a faster rate. As you drive on track, your tyres heat up, so you certainly won't want to set them to their optimal value right away. Instead, you should set your pressures lower than optimum, and after a few laps, check your temperatures to see if they're within the correct pressure window. Your tyres should be one of the first and last things you tune, and by that I mean give your tyres a base tune at the start, and then after you've set up the rest of your car, circle all the way back around to your tyres again and fine tune them if needed. Now your gearing setup adjusts how your transmission behaves. It affects how fast your car revs and how quickly it needs to change gears, and it's vital in determining your car's straight line speed and acceleration. You can approach gear tuning in a couple of ways. If you aren't confident in tuning each and every gear, you can simply adjust your final drive. This will affect every gear and can be seen as a kind of overall setting. Or you can jump into every single gear and fine-tune the behaviour of each gear individually. Essentially, if you're racing on a shorter track, where you want to tune more acceleration into your car, you should look to tune your gears towards the right. This will shorten the gears and increase your car's acceleration potential at the cost of a lower top speed. Moving the gears towards the left will do the opposite. It will hurt your acceleration, but it will give you better top speed potential. Your goal when tuning your gears should really be for your car to hit its maximum speed at the end of the longest straight around a track. If you're on a short track and your car feels like it'll be able to hit a higher top speed than the track layout allows, you can adjust your gears to be shorter. Alternatively, if your car is reaching its top speed way before the end of the fastest part of a track, you may need to tune your gears to be more top speed focused. Next up we have the alignment, and this requires a race suspension. This is part of your car setup in Forza, which is kind of one of the more confusing parts. Here you can adjust your camber, your toe and your caster angle. Each of these are a part of your suspension and affects behaviour from understeer to oversteer, all the way through to overall tyre wear and braking performance. Starting with the camber, this is the angle of your tyres when viewed from the front. Negative camber, which is most common, involves the front of the tyres leaning in towards the car. As you travel around a corner, your car's weight shifts to one side or the other. With your car's weight over one side of your car, it leans heavily on that tyres on that side. Having negative camber will bring more of the tyre into contact with the road as you lean on it. This will provide more grip mid-corner. However, too much camber can cause you to not have enough grip when needed and can result in longer braking distances and less than optimal acceleration. You can set the camber anywhere between about -1.4 and -2. Typically you'll want more negative camber at the front of the car than you do at the rear. Now your toe affects the angle of your tyres when viewed from the top. Having positive toe will mean the front of your tyres point away from your car. Having negative toe will cause the front of your tyres to point in towards the car and look a little bit cross-eyed. Increasing your toe out at the front can increase your car's responsiveness. This will, however, affect your tyre temperatures by increasing them. With the rear of the car, you ideally want a little bit of toe in. This will increase the overall stability of your car, and whichever way you go, you should be very conservative with your toe settings, leaving them close to zero, making only minor tweaks if needed. I normally use toe to help eliminate unwanted characteristics such as oversteer. And you can do this by adding a little bit of toe in at the rear to stabilise your car. The final setup option in the alignment is your front caster angle. This is the name of the angle of your suspension compared to a perfectly vertical alignment. Higher caster angles increase the mounting angle of your front suspension arm. Now this will do a few things, including making your car a little more stable, but it also affects your camber setup, and you'll need to make changes there every time you adjust your caster. Ideally, we want a pretty neutral caster setup, and by neutral I mean around 5 degrees of angle or a little bit more. You can increase this a touch to add some extra stability, but really try not to increase it past around 6 degrees. Then we have your ARBs or your anti-roll bars. These are a really important part of your car setup as they reduce the amount of lean and sway encountered when cornering. As I mentioned earlier, your car's weight balance shifts to the outside of your car when you corner. This will cause the body to start to lean or roll. Too much body roll can make your car unstable and unpredictable. Anti-roll bars step in to reduce this roll and stiffen your car mid-corner. This keeps the balance much more neutral and your car much more stable during a corner and during weight balance changes. The anti-roll bar setup has a big impact on understeer and oversteer characteristics as well. You can stiffen the front ARB to reduce understeer and soften the rear ARB to reduce oversteer. Then you've got your springs, and this also requires a race suspension. Your spring and damper setup will directly affect how your car handles bumps and changes in elevation. Softer springs can make your car easier to drive, but overly soft springs can cause the car to bottom out, which can cause harsh reactions. You should look to tune your front and rear springs in relation to both your car's weight and the characteristics that you want out of your car. If your car is heavier at the front, such as a front engine car, you'll require slightly stiffer front springs. Softer front springs can increase your responsiveness, but too much can promote oversteer. And a softer rear spring setup can make your car a little hesitant to turn in and cause some understeer, but generally it'll be a bit more stable. The ideal area here is to run a pretty soft spring suspension all around without inducing any bottoming out. Then you can tailor your spring setup from front to back to introduce a bit of understeer or oversteer depending on what is needed. Your ride height dictates how close your car is to the track surface. Lowering your ride height can improve your downforce and your straight line speed, but going too low can have negative consequences. As you lower your car, you'll need to increase your spring stiffness to ensure the bottom of your car doesn't touch the track. This will introduce negative effects which come with an overly stiff car, primarily being harsh and unpredictable over bumps. You should aim to lower your car as much as possible before one of two things happen. Either your suspension becomes too stiff to the point where your car is just really hard to drive. And second, if you feel your car hitting the track surface or curbs during the compression phase. If either of these two things happen, increase your ride height a little bit and your setup should be relatively optimal. Your damping is another part of your suspension tuning, which also requires a race suspension upgrade. This should be tuned in line with your springs and your anti-roll bars. Now there are two areas with the damping, both your bump and rebound stiffness, and they both affect your dampers in slightly different ways. The bump stiffness is how stiff your dampers are during the compression phase. This is as your suspension is compressed due to riding over a bump or curb, for example. You should adjust your damper stiffness in line with your springs, so if you've gone for a stiffer spring setup, do the same with your dampers. Dampers that are too soft can cause your car to feel bouncy and unstable. And as a general rule of thumb, your bump stiffness should be around 60 to 75% of your rebound stiffness. And talking of rebound stiffness, this is the term given to how quickly your damper returns to its normal position. This is after your car has ridden over a bump, after the suspension is compressed, and it's the speed at which your suspension resets or returns to its original neutral position. Going too stiff with this and the bump setting can cause your car to bounce off of bumps, just making it unpredictable. But if you go too soft, as I just mentioned, your car will feel overly bouncy. Generally, as you reduce your car's overall weight, you can reduce the stiffness of your dampers, both front and rear. If you want to have more weight over the front of your car though, you can reduce the front damping and stiffen the rear. And you could do the opposite if you need to move your weight balance back towards the rear of the car. Then we get to the suspension geometry setting, which is new to Forza Motorsport. This also requires a race suspension upgrade. Now these affect the finer characteristics of your suspension, which are tied in with your overall suspension behaviour. The first options are the roll centre height offset, and this can affect the stiffness of your car while cornering, kind of similar to your anti-roll bars. A higher offset at the front reduces body roll and makes your car a bit more responsive. Now the rear setup affects your car's behaviour more during the corner entry and exit phase. Higher rear roll centre offset will introduce extra responsiveness as well, much like the front, but it will reduce your on-throttle grip a little bit. Lowering the rear can help with traction, especially during wet conditions. Then you've got the anti-geometry setup, which can be seen as a kind of anti-roll bar setup that links the front and rear of the car. While anti-roll bars affect side-to-side movement during cornering, the anti-dive and anti-squat setup will affect your car's likelihood of leaning either forwards or backwards under braking and acceleration. A higher anti-dive setting will prevent the car from leaning so heavily under heavy braking situations. The same applies to anti-squat, but in reverse. A higher anti-squat setup will prevent the car from pitching backwards violently under acceleration. Now this is a really useful tool to adjust your car's behaviour under braking and acceleration. You can adjust the anti-dive to affect your car's weight balance during braking, and you can increase the anti-squat, which can aid in a smoother transition between braking and acceleration phase. A higher setting for your anti-squat can result in more grip distributed around your car during that transition, and it can result in some reduced understeer. Right, next we move away from suspension and onto the aerodynamics, and this requires a race bumper or a race spoiler upgrade. Adjusting your aero setup has a really big effect on your car's level of grip while cornering, as well as its top speed. Higher front and rear aero will increase the downforce, making your car handle better during turns, but this will in turn reduce your top speed. Adjusting the front and rear aero setup independently will alter your car's behaviour during cornering. So increasing the front wing, for example, will reduce understeer by pushing the front tyres into the ground a little bit more thanks to the increased downforce at the front of the car. But adding more rear downforce can reduce oversteer, making your car behave a little bit more predictably during the corner exit phase. I'd recommend initially making your first adjustments to both the front and rear aero together. Either lower them both or increase them both to find an overall level of downforce that works for your setup. And then you can go into finer details by adjusting the front and rear independently of each other to reduce some of those unwanted characteristics such as oversteer and understeer. Then we've got the brake setup, and brake tuning requires a race brake upgrade. Adjusting your brake setup alters how your car behaves while braking. You can adjust both your brake balance and your pressure. Your brake balance dictates how much braking force is sent to the front and rear brakes, and generally you'll want slightly more pressure going to the front of the car. Your front brakes are more effective than the rear brakes due partly to the shift of weight to the front of the car as you start to brake, but too much front brake balance can increase your chance of locking a wheel, so don't be too aggressive. Try a figure somewhere between 52 and 55% depending on your car. If you also notice the rear brakes locking up, which is kind of characterized by the rear of the car starting to overtake the front, a little bit like oversteer during the braking phase, you can move the brake bias forwards. The brake pressure affects how much pressure is actually applied to your brakes. Increasing this will make your brakes more powerful, but at the cost of increasing the likelihood of locking a wheel if you're not using ABS. I generally leave the pressure set to 100%. One of the last things to change is your differential, and this requires a sport or race diff to be able to change your differential in different ways. Your differential affects how your driven wheels behave in relation to each other. And by driven wheels, I mean the ones that get power, so that'd be your front wheels in a front wheel drive car, rear wheels in a rear wheel drive car. You can adjust your diff to lock your wheels together, forcing them to rotate at the same speed, or you can open it up completely. The important thing to note when adjusting your differential setup is how the outside wheel travels further than your inside wheel during a corner, and this is because it travels a longer distance, so it has to rotate at a slightly higher speed than your inside wheel. If you unlock the differential by bringing it down closer to zero, you'll allow your wheels to rotate at different speeds, which will increase your overall traction, but it does however reduce your ultimate drive out of a corner, which can make your car a little bit more predictable, but sometimes slower if you go for a fully open diff. Now a value between say 40 and 60% for the acceleration is a really good starting point for rear wheel drive cars, and around 30% is probably better for front wheel drive cars. If you've got an all wheel drive car, somewhere between those two values is a good starting point. Increasing the acceleration will increase the likelihood of understeer and oversteer depending on whether your car is front wheel drive or rear wheel drive. So for example, you've got a rear wheel drive car, if you increase the acceleration setup, you'll increase the likelihood of oversteer. Now the deceleration setup should always be a lot lower than the acceleration. Generally, about 10 to 20% lower than the acceleration figure is a good number to be at. Decreasing the deceleration diff setup will increase the amount of understeer or oversteer on the entry to a corner, Again, so if you've got a front wheel drive car, decreasing the deceleration setup will increase the amount of understeer you get. Now another new setting that we've got in Forza Motorsport is the steering wheel. And this is actually kind of aside from your tune, but what it does is it allows you to change the overall force feedback and the steering lock of your car individually. So this setting can be adjusted from car to allow you to tweak individual settings. This can be very useful as a road car can feel very different to a track-bred race car. Rather than having to adjust your global wheel settings every time you swap cars, you can simply make those adjustments for each car individually here. And that about wraps it up for this tuning guide for Forza Motorsport. Now this was a pretty long video, but I tried to keep things relatively lightweight and concise by sharing kind of tips on what each aspect does, but without going too in depth. Let me know whether you've jumped into the car tuning in Forza at all, and if you've got any top tips or anything that you think I've missed in this video, then let me know in the comments below. Also subscribe if you're enjoying this Forza content. I'm going to be releasing loads more videos over the coming days and the coming weeks, so hit that subscribe button and the alert bell to not miss a single video. But until next time guys, I will see you on track.